All right, we are almost there. The last thing that we need to do is set up our WebSocket handler in our website. So I'm going to put a link to this project in the description. And if you make a login for glitch.com, you can hit this remix button and start working off of it. I also have another template over here that I'm going to be going over in this tutorial so that you can follow along. So you can remix this as well. If you don't really want to follow along and you just want to get it working, you can always swap out this URL right here with your socket server and everything should be linked up and ready to go. But let's go ahead and head on over to our template that we're going to use to kind of build up our socket server from scratch in JavaScript. And I'm going to do a brief overview of the website. So if I go into the index.html here, you'll see it's just a very simple website. We have our two sliders here, and we are linking to our script, which is right over here, that is being executed. If you want to be able to open and close a preview window, I can close it here. And if that preview window isn't available for you, you can click this preview here and open the preview pane. The other thing that I want to go over is like, where did I even get these WebSocket events from to begin with? One thing that's really great is that, these are almost identical to what we had in our TouchDesigner WebSocket component. You'll see that there's an open listener. This triggers whenever a message comes in. This is triggered whenever there's an error, and this is triggered whenever the WebSocket closes. But let's take a look at where I found these. So if we just literally search for WebSocket JavaScript, the first thing that comes up is Mozilla's documentation for web APIs for WebSockets. And if we scroll down, there is a little example right here. So you can see here they create a WebSocket, add an event listener, and then up above they have all the names of the different events that are available. So I pulled them from there, and we can start building off of those. Before we start adding the implementation for our WebSocket handler, let's just start by getting a reference to this slider, and then we can get the value out of that. For starters, here is our implementation in the HTML. So you can see it's a range slider, and it has a class called control_td. So let's go ahead and copy the name of this class. And to get a reference to it, we can use a query selector. So we'll call this let control_td equal document dot query selector. And then in quotes, you'll paste the name of the class, but you need to make sure to add a dot beforehand. We can log the value from the slider. So if we console log control_td.value, notice that we actually get back 50. So this is great. We can also modify the value of it. So we could take control_td.value and set it equal to 0, or we could set it equal to 100, and that's our max. So in TouchDesigner, our values go from 0 to 1, and with the web elements, it's going to go specifically from 0 to 100. So good to note. Okay, let's go ahead and create an event listener for our control_td slider. And we can use the event listener input. And then we need a function that will execute whenever there's new input. And we have an event that we can use, but we don't really need it. And in this case, what we can do is print our control_td value. So now if we open up our console and we change our slider, we get all the events. Okay, that's great. What if we only wanted an event when our cursor lifted up? Well, we could change this to change. And now notice that when we move the slider around, there's no event. And then when we lift up, it just sends that one event. This could be helpful in some cases. I'm going to go ahead and switch it back to input. So the last thing we need to do is send our WebSocket message. Now we can do WS send, and we can put whatever we want here, but remember that we have to send it in JSON. So let's go ahead and do that. We're just going to call this slider1, and our value is going to be our Control-TD value. Now, to make sure that it's formatted correctly, we need to also make sure that we're stringifying it and putting it into the format that can be sent over the internet. So no need to import JSON like we did in Python. That's here by default. In all caps, you can type JSON.stringify and then wrap our object. And now if we start changing our slider and we switch back over to our WebSocket king, make sure that we're connected. We'll change the slider. There we go. Okay, we're getting our values. So maybe what we'll do is, instead of sending the direct value, because notice that we're getting values from 0 to 100, let's take our value and divide it by 100. So now that we're getting values that are useful in TouchDesigner. And now we can also go check and make sure that's working in TouchDesigner. I'm going to close out of the text pane and make sure we can see slider 1. There we go. All right, that's working. Cool. So now the last part is going to be receiving a message from TouchDesigner and getting this slider to update. So for this last part, we just need to implement our message handler. So anytime we receive a WebSocket message, the first thing that we need to do is make sure to keep the heartbeat alive. So we're going to check and see if our message contains that ping message. One thing to note is that this message is actually wrapped in an extra object. So in our JavaScript handler, we actually need to call message.data in order to reference anything else. So here we'll see if message.data is equal to ping, then we can just send pong. And that's going to keep our WebSocket server open for a longer period of time. And then similarly, we're just going to return here if that's the case, because we don't really want to handle anything else. Okay, so now we can handle the case where the incoming data is JSON. So there was a built-in handler in Python called json.loads. In JavaScript, it's called json.parse. And now we can log our data. So let's test this out. I'm going to go over to TouchDesigner real quick, and I'm going to open up the console here so that we can see what's happening. And I'm going to change this slider, and you'll see, look at that. Okay, we're getting our data in. That's great. That's really good to see. And now we just need to reference this value the same way that we were using a dictionary in Python. We're going to be using these objects in JavaScript to assign it back to our slider. So I'm going to show you how to do that in JavaScript. I'm going to say let x equal this object. And now we can do something very similar. We can see, is x in x? No, it's not. What about is slider 1? Slider 1 is in that object. Okay, and then how do we reference the data out of this? We can get x and we can reference slider 1, and now we can get the value out of it. So one thing that's great to see is that the way that we can access data in between JavaScript and Python is very similar when you're working with JSON. That's super handy for us. So in order to do this, we're going to, let's just do kind of a naive approach. We're going to assume that we're just getting back that slider 1 data. So we'll see, okay, if slider 1 is in data, then we're going to get that value out of our data. All right, so let's take a look at that. Now we're printing off the exact value that we're getting. So the last thing that we need to do is just get a reference to this slider and assign the value for it. So if we look in our index.html, you can see here that we have a class of controlled by TD. So I'm going to copy that, and we can duplicate our reference here. We can kind of make another query selector. Where instead the class is going to be controlled by TD. And now what's great is that we have a reference to this slider. Let's go ahead and set its value equal to val. And that should be it. So now anytime that we change the slider, oh, actually one last thing. So hang on, the value from our slider is from 0 to 1. But this slider is looking for values from 0 to 100. So we just need to scale it up. We'll go ahead and multiply it by 100. And now when we change it, it lines up. And it's working in real time. All right, that is it. Thank you so much for following along. I hope you found this helpful. I'm really excited to see what type of things that you'll create using this. If you did find it helpful, consider hitting the like button and subscribing. And feel free to check out the Patreon page as well. Cool. Thanks again. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.